Hmm. Says we're now live.
Live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special meeting of the Mahombe Town Council. This is a special meeting to continue the discussion on the budget setting process for fiscal year 2021-22. I'll call the meeting to order and begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, we gather with the intent provided by the Living Peace and Friendship Treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence, and we are thankful for that. We do have people at home joining us on YouTube, and at the end of the session, as is usually the case, we will see if there's any questions that the folks at home may have concerning any item that is discussed at tonight's meeting. The first item on the agenda is the approval of on the agenda is its approval. And that has been a huge point of discussion for the last couple of days because of the amount of work to be done on this agenda. There have been some suggestions about leaving the actual capital budget discussions until next week, when we would have a televised noontime session and focus our efforts on the electric utility budget and the closed session on personnel matters and contract negotiations. In any event, Council, what is your wish for the agenda? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, so, I think based on the CAO's commentary, I do think it's, I think we've leaned on the staff substantially in the last month for a lot of evening meetings. Not that we've been off the hook, but so I do think following up next week with whatever we don't get to this tonight is a good idea. So I think that those noontime meetings may be required depending on how far we get tonight. Although, based on all Luke's heavy lifting over the last couple of days, I think we can really move the agenda far along tonight. So I guess the question is really, at your discretion at, when you want to pull the plug on the play after Act 1, 2, 3, or are we going to have an intermission? So maybe at 9 o'clock we can figure out where we go next.
Okay, and I think we would, but start with the electric utility budgets first.
Dylan, if you and Luke are good with that, sounds fine to me.
Yeah, my suggestion to Councillor Feeney's point would be to approve the agenda as presented and then just see how we go in terms of time with the mayor as chair, knowing that we have a closed session, making a determination about what to hold over for the next meeting, if anything.
Okay. Councillor Wilson?
I'd happily make that motion.
Motion is moved. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver? It's moved and seconded to pursue the agenda as presented. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go right to the second item on the list, which is the discussion of the revised draft 2021-22 Councillor or Mr. Hyde.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just ready for when you said, let's go to the item to jump in and say, obviously we didn't have a motion to direct changes from last meeting, but when you're into a budget process in between meetings, it's very likely that things do come up and we may reflect those things in the budget. Largely, as council has now discussed, there's a staff retirement and turnover happening, and that's being reflected in the budget. That's something that's new. And Luke can, we're not going to do a full presentation and walkthrough, but maybe Luke, would you just be able to quickly highlight, there are just a couple changes from the last version we wouldn't want council to be unaware of, and then we can discuss to the extent that we need to, or move into the electrical if everybody's clear.
Okay, Mr. Wenzel.
Sure thing. I'll take it away. I'll just briefly discuss some of the changes that we made in the latest version of the budget. The first change that we made was we moved the $34,500 salary for the Climate Energy Program Manager. It was originally located in the General Government Services, but after discussion with the CAO, we felt that that wasn't truly reflective of where the cost for that position should go. So we basically just moved that over to environmental development. In the budget, it didn't really make any difference at all. It's just sort of where it's shown in the budget document itself to more accurately reflect the duties and where the cost for that position should be allocated.
Okay.
The next change that we made is on the summary sheet of the budget document. We extracted the legislative expenses and taxation rebates and reductions. These are both previously included under the general government heading in the summary sheet. We extracted these two expenses just to provide a bit more clarity around the picture for the admin and finance costs contained under general and admin, and also extracted those other two large costs out just to provide a more thorough picture of what we're looking at and what the costs truly reflected. So we feel that that's going to provide a clearer picture for council when reviewing that section of the document. So no actual figure changes, just a bit of pulling out and separating things on the summary sheet.
Okay.
The third change we made was for IT costs. Prior to the last version of the budget, they were all allocated, or they were all shown as an expense under general government. Since then, we've allocated them to the water and electric utility. They were already allocated, but the way in which they were done so, it wasn't clear as to how it was being done, and it was over inflating the general government IT expense. So the net effect is zero, but we just once again tried to go through and make that allocation more clear and concise to actually show the true expense and the true cost center as appropriate.
So when we talk about, by example, the IT in the water department, things like the SCADA systems and the ongoing upgrade of the software, that shows in the change you're just talking about. But what about the staff in the water department who have been using laptops that are provided, as they are to most members of staff, if not all? Are they part of the general government, or are they part of the water utility?
We basically did a blanket allocation for IT costs, which would include like computer hardware, everything like that. And we allocated it based on sort of the best estimate we could get based on how many staff people are using what services and that kind of stuff. So that should now accurately be reflected within the budget. There's something did come up last year though, where say like equipment purchase, like a new computer, isn't included in our current service contract with MJSB. Mm-hmm. So in the case of a new computer having to be purchased, that would have to be a direct cost over and above what is currently in the budget being allocated just through the general contract for IT shared services.
Okay. All right.
So moving on, the other one that we changed, this is probably the biggest change overall. We went through and we removed the salary portion for the Director of Public Works from both of the utilities and fully integrated into Town General to reflect the new Manager of Operations or Manager of Public Works position we're looking at. Basically, the reallocation to Town General was offset through a few savings. The biggest part that we were able to avoid any sort of tax increases through this process was due to a proposed indirect cost bill back to Riverport Electric for administrative services rendered by the town. This is in relation with us now looking at doing payroll for their employees and possibly the new proposed allocation of costs between the two utilities, which we'll get further into tonight in open or closed session, depending on where the conversation goes.
And Luke, I might just jump in real quick on that one, because
Sure.
what we're really looking at there, as council knows, when we talk about removing the public works manager position from the electric utility, where we previously allocated some of that manager time to the electric utility, we are going to have, or the proposal is to have, those services performed by the Riverport manager of electric utility. And essentially that person has previously been responsible to do their billing and payroll systems, everything that would be done by our finance department. So the offsetting opportunity is you essentially take the hours that person was going to have to spend on that. The town picks up those hours as a manager, replacing Derek's hours, and we take on some administrative and financial services that we have the capacity to provide. So essentially that allows the town to avoid any costs associated with that change and still get the capacity we need, which is at the managerial level, banking on the capacity we have, which is in our finance department. And thanks very much to Luke and his staff for being in a position to do that more effectively than the lone operator out in Riverport would do, obviously putting her time to managerial duties. So that's the kind of flow through of how that is pictured there.
Thank you, Dylan.
Hmm.
So that's the end of that one. And then there were also 3 changes to the capital budget that we put through. There were 3 projects, or I guess 2 projects, that were missed in earlier versions of the budget. The first one is under general town. It's for hall furnishing, or town hall furnishings and equipment for the newly renovated council chambers. On your most recent version of the budget, you will see that that is now put in for a $15,000 capital project to be funded from capital reserve. That's to furnish the new council chambers once the renovations are complete, and get some equipment and furniture and stuff for in that facility.
And that was from reported to council just prior to the budget process and referred by council to the budget process. We just had neglected to actually include it in the document, and it's reserve funded.
Right. And the other one, it was in relation to the home heating program. This is split amongst the town general capital budget as well as the electric utility capital budget. There has been a $25,000 capital project put into each, the town and the electric utility, for this program. And the full program in each of the town and utility is a total of $50,000, but there's a 50% matching grant through Fcm that we have included in there in the projection as well.
Mr.
And other than
Hyde.
that, those are all the updates that
I'll
we
just jump
made.
in on
Wait,
that
wait,
one a
wait,
little
wait.
bit too.
Mr. Hyde, go ahead, please.
Thank you, David. I'll just jump in a little bit on that one because I think this will be new for new counselors and maybe depth of memory for the counselors who were in the previous council. But so we now have, as everybody knows, a home heating program that we've developed through AREA, has a very specific application at the current time. It does, single unit heat pumps. But when we embarked on that program, we also put a number of irons in fires to try to be able to expand on that program to better target niche opportunities in the community with additional types of home heating services. And one of those services that we have been pursuing is working with Thermal, the local startup, on their pilot for an energy storage technology, an energy thermal storage technology. But we've also identified, and we talked about this in last year's budget, after 1 year of the home program operation, so come October, we're in a position where we would be eligible to go to the Fcm for some financing to look for opportunities to expand on that program. And they are, as part of their support, their home heating support, in a position to potentially institute a 50% grant funding opportunity for those residents accessing the program. So this would be somebody who needs to get a heating pump or potentially heating pump with associated home renovation. The Fcm would come in for half of the funding. For the current time, we've been very successful in securing the other half of the funding through private financial providers. So our current home heating program is supported by Credit Union Atlantic, and the town thankfully has only put time into program development and promotion and not actually extended direct loans to participants in the program. And hopefully that will be something we can continue with. That is still an eligible activity under the Fcm. But essentially this has been in the budget having to do with our home heating program for 2 years now, and I think we've spent about $10,000, and we still would not be eligible for FCM funding until this year. So it is something that we would be definitely intending to come back to council to report on, but we have made certain commitments in the long term to looking for opportunities to expand the program. So this is a roll forward of that from the prior year. And I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, but happy to answer them.
So 2 budget portions of the town's operating budget will be kicking in $25,000 each.
So the way we've done it is a split between the electric utility and the town. It's actually not known at the current time whether expenses are eligible to the utility or the town, depending on how the program could be rolled out. So the town, for example, is the one that is able to directly support through loans to homeowners. So if we got into a position where the town were going to provide any possible support to homeowner participants in a program, for example, to match or leverage FCM, or for specific cases such as the thermal pilot, where we might not have external financial support. So that's the type of program where residents pay back 100% of the costs. Those type of costs would have to come under the town. Otherwise, the electric utility has been, because it is beneficial to the utility, able to undertake studies to support expansion of that program. So it depends on what type of activities we would have happen, but the 25,000 under the town would be necessary to match 25,000 from FCM if we're targeting supports to residents in a direct manner. And that would be if we don't succeed in bridging Credit Union Atlantic funding or another private funder, which to this point we have been successful in doing.
Okay, Councillor Wilson had a question.
During that session, you said, if I heard it correctly, that we are involved or proposing to be involved with a startup company that's into thermal storage in Mahombe. Is that, and when you say we, I assume you mean the electrical utility, is that correct?
Yeah, starting about 18 months ago, this company had approached the town. It's a local venture, looking for a project to pilot the technology in 10 homes. So at this point, what we've been doing is we've just worked with them in the archetype modeling of different home energy uses in Mahombe, which is great information for our broader expansion of our program, but it would also support them in hopefully securing funding to move forward to a pilot stage. And if they are successful in obtaining that funding from wherever they're able to do so, they're still looking at piloting in 10 homes in town, which they would need to recruit. And the town has in the past agreed to help them to recruit those 10 appropriate homes and allow them to access the electric thermal storage rate that exists under our electric utilities rate structure.
Okay, well, I'm surprised that if it's been going on for 18 months, we haven't heard about it until now, or at least I haven't. And I struggle as someone representing a taxpayer to get involved with picking and choosing the technologies around how we manage our energy use. That being said, that's really a discussion for the board of directors of the electrical utility, which is, I guess, us in a different context.
Okay, Councillor Feeney.
So again, this is like tough timing, meeting number 4, having this. So this is $50,000 split between the town and the electrical utility for financing of loans, or is this deemed to be direct grants to individual homeowners?
So yeah, I mean, it's 2 things. The electric utility portion has been to support the studies that have been currently engaged in modeling the town's energy usage, the different archetypes, and the way that they currently use energy and opportunities to electrify that load. So basically, where are fossil fuels being used in what way? What would be the appropriate, targeted program to address that? Those are electric utility activities to this point. But if we do target, we do determine that there are appropriate homes to target for a new program, and the neothermal program is an example of such a program. We have in the past gone and have managed to go out on the market and obtain private funding, and that's how we've done the Credit Union Atlantic. But the traditional model, as most units in Nova Scotia have done, is to put some municipal money on the table as a loan to property owners participating. So essentially, if you go in over 10 years, we structure it such that over 10 years, the town makes back the money plus a small administrative charge. And that's how PACE programs work all over. We've been very, because we have a limited debt ceiling that we can carry as a small town, we've been very cautious about extending that. And we've been good at finding private financing, but as you know, MODL and other places, they do a lot of this. So the 25,000 from the town and 25,000 from FCM was basically projected to pitch to the FCM, where there are some cracks in our Credit Union Atlantic financing. The town could be prepared to pick those up. And that could have to do with specific programs. It could have to do with low-income individuals. There are some cracks in where the credit union financing may be, it's a private company, so they're looking to find cases where they know that they can make a return. So this is very much conjectural. At the current time, our only commitment is that we participated as a funding partner in one study with Dalhousie to model the energy archetypes, and that would be wrapping up in the next 2 months. I think it was started last year, and there was a report to council on that last fall. But that's a very small project. It's not talking about getting into loans to homeowners or anything. But it was always predicated on the idea that that was the future. That was the future possibility if we were successful in defining programs that could be targeted.
So just to be clear, it's $50,000 or $25,000?
Well, there's 25,000 in each of the electrical utility and the town.
Okay.
But the town's 25,000 would be, the thought is to support loans if loans ended up being used.
Okay. And so and we're going to account for that as what? As that's going to be we're going to draw that out of, essentially, we're going to take that off the balance sheet and turn in and just transfer it to use that cash to support loans to homeowners who might want to grow under the grow your load strategy.
Yeah, where private financing couldn't be obtained on the market.
Okay. Okay, I gotcha. So it's essentially the equation should equal out. On one side, we'll have a loan, and the other side will have a receivable.
Yeah, the only challenge with PACE programs is the debt carrying, and typically, which is why we're looking at a very niche amount, and the hope would be to use FCM to offset 50% and private financing from Credit Union Atlantic wherever it's suitable to do so. So rather than having maybe a $250,000 PACE program, we would try to have a $25,000 PACE program that basically plug the gaps in the market-driven program we've designed. Yeah.
At least, like, as we know from last year, our doubtful accounts are very, very low. And I think Luke, we wrote off only about $2,000 during the entire year. So I'm assuming that if we decided strategically we wanted to lend money to people who lived in town, backstopped by some guarantee, we would have a good chance of collecting. It's just that it's a tough use of cash given the context of where we are right now and trying to hold tax rates. But anyway.
Well, and I will say that it would be, very much dependent on meeting those external funding requirements. So there, I want to leave it in the budget, but again, my expectation is that we're eligible to go to the FCM in the fall, and that would be predicated on doing a study. So before we'd even institute a program, it's likely to be very late in the fiscal year, could even be next fiscal year. But because this was already in the budget, I didn't want to actually drop it from this year only to have it come back up again. So that's why we brought it forward here, because it was in last year's budget.
And this is funded out of the the capital reserve?
Well, it's most units end up funding it from capital reserve or borrowing the PACE program,
Yeah.
but it's a small enough amount. We wouldn't recommend borrowing.
Okay, fair enough.
CAO, has FCM established any criteria to be used in identifying the applicant that would be considered for this kind of a program?
Yeah, they've done quite a bit of work on it. We fall into the category of having an existing program because our home program was launched last year. So we essentially have to do an analysis of where that program has been successful and where it has room to expand. And a lot of informing the room to expand, I think, will the Dalhousie study that I mentioned that we're doing now with geothermal, which models basically opportunities in the community where fossil fuels are being used, could be quite helpful in terms of making the case to the FCM as to where there are areas to potentially expand our program, and also just in terms of modeling how far can we get. Let's say we have dramatic uptake from residents, which is great. How far will that actually go in terms of new demand for a utility, which is great, to have that new electrical demand, but also reduction of community fossil fuel usage, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So the FCM, essentially they need us to conduct a study on the first year of the home program in the fall, and then that study will support program expansion to the extent that there are identified opportunities or identified gaps. And like I said, one of those gaps tends to be people at the lower end of the income spectrum, and that's where Bridgewater has kind of focused a lot of their energy work, and we haven't acknowledged, in our strategic plan, we talk about equity and access, and so there is likely an analysis that will be part of that FCM piece there from that angle as well.
I guess I'm thinking in particular of the individual who may be denied external financing by the credit union because of their financial situation. And we would then engage them in the program to which you are referring with the expectation that we are going to be able to recover the costs involved from the individual who's been denied by the credit union?
It's something that we contemplated when we went into the program with the credit union, and we asked them to keep track of denials for credit. So, people who didn't meet their criteria for lending. Because of the nature of our program, that hasn't happened much. What we offer is a very specific product. So you start to get into those denials more when you have a home where you're looking at it like a larger conversion. So you might have like a ducted heat pump system where it'd be a $15,000 conversion or a $20,000 conversion. And that's just slightly outside of the range for someone. So like it may be more about topping up or providing some level of, like almost like a grant subsidy that brings them down to a level where it is more, possible for private financing. So we haven't actually had any denials in Mahombe from our, I think 50 assessments that have been either conducted or scheduled at this point under the current program. I think there have been maybe 2 between the area units that have applied and been rejected. But again, that's partially because we're only offering financing for the base single wall mounted heat pumps that are, it's not a large loan.
Okay. And how many of the installations that have been assessed by the external service provider, how many people have actually opted to go for it?
We have 5 installations, and I asked the most recent area staff meeting, is that really 5 of 50? So, 1 in 10. And they said that about a third of the home visits are still pending due to the recent COVID situation. So they can't say it's 5 out of 50. It may be 10 out of 50 by the time that's done.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, back to Luke. Sorry, Luke.
That was all from me for that part. So now we can move along to, not sure what section we're going to go on. If we're going to delve into the electric utility, or let's focus on the grant allocation section, or not sure what
the
best
electric
direction would be.
utility was the next one up. I don't know. Maybe we
Yeah.
should just. It's more about questions than anything, because we have
Right.
provided a lot of info. So we can certainly take some questions on the electrical utility, Mr. Mayor, if that makes sense.
Yes, please. Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, Luke indulged many of my questions this afternoon. So thank you, Luke, for your time. I think we're generally heading on the right down on the right track now. So I guess as a question and just brief commentary that like at the end of the day, we've tried a few different methodologies to tell the story. Luke's done a really nice job of kind of evolving the layout of the financial reporting to give a little more of an improved illustration of where things are. And, you know, fundamentally, the numbers haven't changed. They're just reorganized in a slightly different format. But I think that from my vantage point, like the message is still pretty clear. And that is that the utility still isn't giving us the kind of torque and benefits that we're really all trying, we think aspirationally we would like to achieve. And I know we're at the very beginning of the term, and I know our number one item in the strategic plan is, you know, to improve the performance of the utilities, and that is improvement many non-financial terms as well, but we have some heavy lifting. We have some heavy lifting over the next 3 years to get utility fixed. And I think it'll inevitably, in my I think now educated opinion, it'll lead to us having a very serious conversation a year from now about rates, because I think the rates now are they're not high enough to give us the kind of benefits as a community that we require. So the utility continues to have negative cash flow. We are spending more money than we're taking in when you combine our operating expenses and our capital investment. We pay no income tax and we pay no dividend, and we have a large part of the overhead subsidized by the town or vice versa. So we can only do that for so many years before we inevitably run out of the cash that we have on the books. And, you know, so when we only have $129,000 in cash, that's what we have. And so we have a $2 million business with $128,000 in the bank. So we have no room for error, and so fortunately, you know, maybe we're heading into a period of higher growth with more customers. We have a, you know, grow your load agenda, I think that we all support. There are a number of one-time initiatives, all that look good to me. But we're on a very thin edge, and it wouldn't be prudent for us to take any more risks. And so I think Luke's done a nice job with Dylan and the area team on putting in some contingencies. I think the line item on the Nova Scotia Power line item has a $85,000 notional contingency. So we're probably, you know, some would say it's a conservative budget, but the budget still shows a loss. So I think I was a little worried earlier today and yesterday that we weren't going to be able to have a fulsome conversation about where we are with the utility. But I think now that Luke spent all these hours on his illustrations, it's a lot clearer for all of us. And so I think we're heading in the right direction. But boy, we can't take any more bad news. I guess that's what the glass is half full view of it. You know, if we have another bad decision by the URB against the rules against us, or if we had heaven forbid a catastrophic default from a major customer, we would have real problems. So I know no one likes talking about higher power rates, but we're going to have a responsibility, in my opinion, to have that conversation maybe later on in the year. There you go. There's my 2 cents worth.
Councillor Wilson and Deputy Mayor is next. Okay, Councillor Wilson, Deputy Mayor.
I have a couple of very specific questions because I just didn't understand the budget. In note 3 regarding Nova Scotia Power, we're talking about being $85,000 over the last year's budget and I've got, my notes aren't very clear, but what here's my problem. Note 4 says there should be a 1% or a power purchase agreement increase in costs from area. But it doesn't say what that power purchase agreement increase was. But we're showing somewhere between a 4 and an 8% increase in power costs from area. So are they charging us an extra 4 to 8% for their power this year? And this note 5 says that we should be showing a 1% increase on imports, which is from New Brunswick, but our actuals are showing 10 to 15% increase in costs. So there's a big gap between what the note says it should be and what the actual number is. And I'm just wondering why that is.
I can jump in on that one. Those notes were basically preliminary notes. As the budget got discussed and we got further into the process, I have talked with Aaron Long. I have firmed up the numbers. So those notes were outdated and I did miss updating those notes appropriately. That's where the confusion comes from. As far as the wind farm power, there is the power purchase agreement that stipulates what the power purchase price is for every year for the next number of years. And then that would just be multiplied by the megawatt hours that the town would receive from the wind farm, which is a fairly static number. And then as far as the imports, it's basically just a balancing equation from there, basically showing how much power we need to buy minus what we get from the wind farm would then equal to what the imports is. And the import number was a number, the rate for the imports was a late number coming in the budget process. So those numbers have been firmed up now, but those notes are out of date, and that's where the discrepancy is coming from.
Yeah, well, that tells me exactly nothing. So what I'm wondering is, we show I just still don't know what the power purchase agreement increase is. So what is that in percentage terms for this year?
I don't have that right off the top of my head, but I can get that for you.
Well, let's assume it's a smallish number. And so the question is, why are we 4 to 8% showing a 4 to 8% increase in actual costs if the increase from area is 2%? And similarly, why are we showing 10 to 15% increase in costs from New Brunswick if the stated increase is 1%? It has nothing to do with volumes and so on. It has to do with percentages.
Are you comparing actual to budget?
No, I'm just comparing your number 5 note and number 4 note in the budget, which talks about the level of increase, to the actual increase that's in the budget. Actual versus budget, yes. Budget versus budget, sorry. See, what puzzles me overall is that we enjoyed a $400,000 reduction in power costs because of area, which is a wonderful thing. But nothing else has changed, and that $400,000 just isn't there anymore. And I'm not suggesting that somebody took it home and put it under their mattress. But what I'm wondering is, the problem I've always had with town budgets since years ago is that habitually we overstate costs and understate revenue, so that we've got lots of wiggle room when it comes to actually dealing with results as the years go on. And I'm just afraid that might be part of the problem here.
I can definitely look into more information and try to work with Aaron to try to get a more defined. He's the one that does a lot of these calculations for the power purchase figures and stuff. I mean, I know Aaron is very detailed. He has his ducks in a row and he knows where it's coming from. I unfortunately don't have all that information at the current moment, but I can definitely work with him to get a more detailed answer for that question.
Okay, appreciate it.
Luke, you're basing the next budget on 2019 volume, right?
We are basing it on the budgeted volume for fiscal 2020-21. So what we were expecting to happen last year, but yeah.
Okay, hold on. Deputy Mayor, you're on.
I feel bad almost changing the topic. I think that was a very good conversation, but I wanted to pick up on something that Councillor Feeney was talking about, which I think at some point we need to have that conversation, whether it's at council or asset management, around what are we expecting from the utility, and as council, do we have the same understanding as to what we expect? So in my mind, one of the things that as Councillor Feeney was talking about, it was I am sort of giving area and staff a pass right now, because I sort of feel we're investing into the utility and investing into what we want, and so we might be, I guess, short on cash. I could be wrong, but that's my reasoning for where we are at right now. But I have very limited knowledge based on, I guess, historical values and figures, and so I think it might be very helpful for us to be on the same page on what do we want to see from the utility, what kind of numbers do we want to see, what kind of reserves do you want to put in place, so that we don't get into a place where we're playing a risk game, so to speak, if this something was to happen. I don't feel that we are all on the same page on that. So whether it's at council or asset management, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had so that we're on the same page.
Thank you. Councillor Feeney, did you have a thought?
Just a couple things. It looks to me that the town has benefited greatly from our relationship with area and the pull through from the MB Power, I guess, imports. Like our direct margins percentages has improved, and that thank goodness. But we've also loaded up a tremendous amount of incremental cost into the utility in the last 5 years. Like I think, Luke, if you go on your sheet, if you look at our distribution costs from the first year I was on council to today, they've more than doubled. So, I mean, so the utility's better. The stability of the utility is better. We have a more robust network. We've made investments, but our cost of administration and distribution is dramatically higher than it was, which is one of the reasons why Councilor Wilson is, legitimately surprised when he comes, over this 4-year period. I mean, a lot has changed. And so our revenue is similar. Our volumes are similar. Our costs are way up. Thank God we've had area to bring our power costs down, or we'd be in a real conundrum. So I think that the deputy mayor makes a good point about, expectations. Like, I think there are a lot of legitimate strategies for the utility. Should we be running the utility where strategically the idea is to have the lowest power rate possible to benefit the community directly through lower power rates? Should we be running the utility so that we can get a $200,000 annual dividend so we can pay for the fire hall? I mean, I'm completely open-minded, and like all of you, I'm happy to go with the majority view on that, but we haven't really had that conversation yet. Right now, there's no money in the utility to extract if we wanted to, I guess. So we are by design or by happenstance, like we are where we are right now. What we're doing is we're running the utility at cost.
Okay, thank you. CAO, you had a comment?
I wanted to give council some credit here. I like the use of the term strategically reviewing, and council's been working on a strategic plan, and noted in the strategic plan is a review of our electrical rates and the structure that underlies them. And in fact, an electrical utility rate study is included in this year, both in the budget and the strategic plan, the intention of which is for council to be able to make those determinations with the support of rate design experts. And that's the kind of consideration that they look at. Typically, a rate design process projects the utility forward a few years and gives us a chance to consider trends and where we want to be. So, I think it really is intended for that purpose. And we have recently, through area, conducted a request for standing offers to kind of test the waters for some expertise around rate design. So I'm pleased to say we have some additional experts to draw on in that regard, and that's kind of set up for all the utilities as a part of area to be able to engage in rate study activities and rate design activities. So it is a focus. It's a great acknowledgement by council of the need to do it and the need to do it this year, and then to come out with some clear direction that will be reflected in future budgets.
But if nothing changes, as we sit here tonight, we're going to go in the hole on the electric. Our
But
cash, we've got negative cash flow, I think is what Councillor Feeney is saying. If we don't get any
Yes.
increases, but if NSPI doesn't get, if they don't get what they're looking for from the adjudicator, we're still going to be in a negative cash flow situation. CAO?
Yeah, it's a negative cash flow situation that's being driven by a capital program funded from
Yeah.
prior year surplus. I mean, we're doing it on purpose. It's not like we couldn't avoid doing it. We could not be making those capital expenditures in the current year. I think the council's aware that a large part of our current year projected expenditures have to do with supporting development, which is bringing additional rate, bring additional load, bring additional tax base. So, if we weren't upgrading our system to support some of that new development, we wouldn't be getting those new revenues. And that's been a kind of underlying approach that the town has taken to strategic development. And the biggest capital project we've got in there for this year is serving the new nursing home project.
So from the citizens' perspective, the fact that we've got this apparent negative cash flow, on balance over a period of time, it is going to bode well for our situation in the town.
Yeah, I mean, it's an investment in the sustainability of the system, in that only by ensuring that the system is upgraded to handle the kind of development that
Yeah.
we're supporting, can we then have additional load on the system from those new developments. I think one of the big challenges there is going to be, and we've talked about this a lot, continuing to manage the solar piece such that new developments are contributing. Because the utility has to continue, and we've talked about this so much over the years, but we have to continue making an effort to upgrade our system to support development. We have to pay for those system costs. Then we do anticipate that new development is going to be contributing to the system. And it's never been an option in the past for new development to be predicated around the idea of defraying some of those costs. We have always taken on the system costs associated with upgrading to serve development, and we have never kind of compromised that on the basis of solar ambitions. But I do think that, and we're talking about larger than individual rate class customers here, that we are going to have a conversation about that as things unfold. We've recently reviewed our individual rate class approach, and it's pretty simple to cap individual home usage, but it is much more complex when we're talking about the kind of system investments we need for a major institutional, commercial, or industrial client, and the province now encouraging those entities to look more closely at solar on a large scale, so larger than the class 1 scale that we've had rules recently in front of the board, but there's still that final frontier of larger scale renewable development on our grid, and our continued requirement to invest in serving those properties. So we all know that's out there, and it would be one of the things we're looking at in that kind of a rate process, because rates and regulations go hand in hand. So sometimes there may be a need to change the regulatory approach to where we draw the lines around system investment. If an upgrade is being made to serve a property, and that property should be contributing to the load. So we need to take a look at how that is structured. And I think we'll have the opportunity to do that this year.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay. Mr. Wenzel, will you continue?
Well, Luke, I guess if there are no more questions about, I guess we can probe a little bit on electrical before we move on to grants, just in case. Because I assume, Luke, your next thing would be to move on to the grants conversation, but I'm understanding we do have a closed session and encouraging people to hold a question that they may feel is appropriate to close session if it concerns personnel or contracts. Just want to ask, under the big umbrella of electrical, Any other questions that anyone has that are, burning with respect to this year's budget that, we want to have an opportunity to address, or at least to get back to you on them?
Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, Mayor, I think that the CAO and Luke have done a nice job of illustrating the real burning issue, which is the URB item with the wheel route tariff, and the incremental costs that we've got budgeted. I do think that it would be helpful if we could keep council kind of in the loop on any progress or anything that happens in that case, either positive or negative as the year unfolds, because it's such a material amount of money. So if there's good news, I think we'll all celebrate together, and if there's bad news, we'll all cry together. But at least we should do it in a timely manner, not the day before the audits due.
And we'll all go start looking on buy and sells from the US to buy diesel generation assets to bring up here. I hate to think about that kind of thing. I hope
Fair
battery storage will do the trick, but very good point, Councillor P.
Okay.
I do think there's a good opportunity to talk to the community about, again, this if anything further supports the solar garden strategy in my mind. I think we'll all agree with that. Clearly avoiding that cost that we don't have in our control seems like it's a prudent and wise thing to do. So I think we're making great progress on that front.
Okay.
All right, well,
We good on the electrical?
sounds like it.
All right. Shall we talk about grants to organizations?
All right, Luke, is there any introductory comment here? I know you had prefaced that we didn't receive applications from some of our usual grantees, and I think you can describe maybe how you've approached it here in terms of what's displayed for people.
Yeah, for sure. Historically, in the past, there's a couple recipients of grant funds here on the grants appendix. Some of them are just sort of historical community grants that we give out to various organizations, and some of them are funded based on grant requests. If there's any questions about why we give it or anything like that, I can definitely answer them. Basically, all in all, we were looking at distributing $7,910 based on grants received and historical amounts given out by the town. Right now in the draft budget, I'm proposing that we stick to an amount around $5,500 based on prior years, but that is, at full discretion of council based on how this conversation rolls out. So yeah, from there, I'll just let the discussion start. And if there's any questions from me about the grants appendix or anything like that, let me know.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I know like once a year we have this conversation about the grants, and there's always a few items that trickle in throughout the year that we usually have the ability to respond to with modest support for modest requests. But I always think when I look at this number that it kind of fails to capture if we were talking to, our neighbors on the street corner about the degree of, grants in lieu that we also do. So we had a conversation in our last meeting about an incremental support for the swimming pool for power and water. We also do that for the Mahombe Wood and Boat Festival Society on the Government Wharf, the museum, the Mahombe Center. There's a number of other items that, where there's an extra level of generosity. It's not just illustrated with the $5,500 we see on the grant page. And I do think it might be useful if we could kind of aggregate some of those other that other community support kind of in one big bucket, just from just to be able to speak to it. I think the moral of the story is the town does a lot more than just the 5,500 on this page. Although we'd like to do even more. There is a substantial support from the tax base.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wenzel. and then CAO.
Luke, you might be about to say the same thing as me. Were you just going to call attention to the next page for
I
reference?
sure
or-
was.
Okay, go ahead.
So if you look at the next page, it's called Appendix Subsidies. That is where we laid all the subsidies sort of given to other organizations such as the swimming pool, Mahombe Museum, Chamber of Commerce, Senior Safety, LCLC, the library, and all those. So all those grants are captured, or subsidies are captured in the next page of the budget
you go.
package. So the grants page is just looking at sort of the grant requests for, funding for events or something like that, rather than just sort of like ongoing operational costs, I'll say,
Okay,
if that clears it up at all.
thank you.
And then the tax exemptions on the following page represent the Mahombe Center and Museum grants as well.
Yep. Deputy Mayor?
Somebody help me with the page numbers, please.
108, 109.
Okay, thanks.
I noticed we've got the Chamber of Commerce festivals. Has the Chamber of Commerce not disassociated itself directly with those festivals?
Well, they have recently made an announcement in that regard, and my understanding is they were encouraging the members who had previously been involved in organizing some of those festivals, or the sub-festival organizers for things like the Reindeer Run, if COVID precautions were to permit that activity to happen again, to continue doing those organizing activities as independent organizations or groups. So I would say Luke and I didn't feel that we would revise the budget on the latest communication from the chamber, but it is quite possible that those subsidies would not be accessed in the same way. And we did acknowledge last year that there isn't really a current basis underlying that practice. It's kind of evolved over the years and become a bit divorced, as you say, Mr. Mayor, from the current festival organization. So I definitely think in this year, and most likely in cooperation with the chamber, we'll revisit how we've been doing that funding. But I think we've just left it in here at this point based on prior years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver.
Yes, I'm a little confused by the list under the grants to organizations, because we've only, as far as I know, received 5 official requests. And yet there's quite a much longer list than that in the document. So that's one point. And then I also would like, if possible, if the CAO or the finance manager could remind us of any principles or guidelines that council has used in the past in order to decide amounts or priorities.
Well, I'll let Luke take the first part. Luke, can you reiterate where some of these amounts came from?
Sure. So I'll just go through line by line maybe, and just sort of give my understanding of the background, if that works. For the Bayview Community School grant, that is just a standing amount that we typically give every year, typically for Bayview yearbook support. Last year, I know we did contribute to a grad parade, I believe, for like all the local schools due to COVID. But typically, it's around a $250 grant we give to Bayview to help support the Bayview fundraiser or yearbook. Fcm Advocacy Fund, that's just a standing amount that we contribute every year to that fund. Health Services Foundation, that was an actual grant request that was received this year, as well as the Heritage Boatyard Co-op. The Founder Society Home and Garden Tour, that is a standing item. We typically have historically just provided them $500 a year for that event. There's never been a grant request since I started with the town for that event in particular. It's just been a standing contribution on the books. Mahombe Music Association, that was an actual application that we have received. The MODL Pro Kids, that is once again a standing contribution to that program to help support it and allow residents of the town to participate in that program. The Para Hockey Cup Championships, that was a grant that was received. South Shore Tourism, once again, that's a standing contribution toward various fund tourism events or promotion for the town and the surrounding areas. and the Vaughan Lunenburg County, that was a physical grant request. So most of the ones that, or all of the ones that there are no physical grant requests for in the grant package are basically standing contributions that have been contributed for a number of years based on, I'm not sure what the underlying agreement was. It was before my time, but looking back upon my start, it was just a standing amount that was contributed every year to those organizations. And that's not saying we have to continue that trend. It's at full discretion of council. So we can definitely discuss and, you know, see where that takes us.
CAO, did you have a,
Yeah, I can answer the second part of this. So the second part of the question concerned the criteria for selection or eligibility, I think. So the town does have a grants to organizations policy, which is on our website. Put the link in the chat for council members, but for any members of the public, you can go to the town's website, and under policies and bylaws, you can find it there. It essentially specifies two eligibility requirements, both for the organizations applying and then the type of funding that will supply. But at a high level, it also provides, essentially provides the following, which says that is the policy of the town of Mahombe to consider within its financial capacity financial support to nonprofit organizations and societies or groups that provide programs, services, or activities to enhance the quality of life for Mahombe residents. Such financial support is provided in recognition of the value these organizations provide to the well-being and growth of the community. So this is the high level, and then typically it's supposed to be for project funding or finite capital or operating project funding rather than core operational funding.
thank you. Councillor Carver.
Yeah, so it would seem that I'm still a little confused. Thank you for those explanations, because the categories seem to be mixed. The ones who have submitted a specific request are all muddled up with the ones that are standing. At another time, it might be helpful to separate them. That's just the way I think. And it seems to me that some of these requests aren't in compliance with some of the criteria that the CAO just outlined. So I'm feeling a little bit at a loss right now about how to make decisions about these items.
CAO.
So I know it can be difficult. You know, we are televised, and it, you know, is obviously these are requests that a lot of people have put effort into, whether they meet our criteria or not. And we love to see all the groups find the ability to operate the programs they're looking for. But that being said, you know, I think the only way to really work through it in a meeting setting is to go line by line. And Luke can highlight whether that request came as the consequence of an application. And if it did, we can look at the application and the eligibility of it. And, you know, it's a relatively short number of lines. So it typically doesn't take a long time.
May I have one more question on this?
Yes, please.
Mayor, thank you. So when applicants are applying, they would know, would they not, that we're not giving money, or that our criteria do not include operating expenses? Is that laid out in the application form?
It is laid out. I don't mean to say we don't include operating expenses. We don't include core ongoing operating funding. We're not supposed to cover shortfalls. If somebody says we're offering a new program and we'd like to offer it for the first time and we're looking for support for that, that would be eligible. But if they say, you know, we've been offering a program for 20 years, we're offering exactly the same program, but we have a shortfall in cost this year, typically that hasn't been an eligible expense. Now, Chester would have a similar program. With COVID, they did extend the eligibility to groups that were experiencing a temporary shortfall, which is, you know, a council's discretion to do. I don't think that's really been the nature of our application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions?
So would, Mr. Mayor, would you be comfortable if we do go line by line? I don't, maybe even put it up on the screen or whatever.
I think it would be useful, CAO. It would certainly kind of equalize the understanding across, particularly with the new counselors that have not been through this process before.
Luke, would you mind putting it up on the screen and we can just, I think the first one is the yearbook, and I think it's pretty obvious what, we have a $250 recurring amount. Typically, I think a request does come, but doesn't typically come within the criteria of our grants program. So we'll get an email at some point in the year saying, is the town still going to contribute to this as we have done in the past? So we essentially put the number here. I think, Luke, is the tradition. We put the number here. Yep. And they will follow up with a request at some point.
Can you increase the size of the spreadsheet on the screen, Mr. Wenzel, please?
That better?
Is that better to see? Okay, please.
Okay. So we can just go through line by line, and as we go through, I can make a note here on what is agreed upon or anything, any comments or anything that arise from this discussion.
Okay.
The first one that we'll start with is the Bayview Community School for the Bayview yearbook funding. As mentioned here, it's historically been at $250, but there's no requests that are typically received for this grant. It's just a standing offer that the town provides as a support to the local school. So we can choose to go with the $250 standard, or we can increase, decrease it based on the forthcoming discussion.
I think we go with the 250, but it would be useful to remind the admin staff at the school, as we have done in the past, that they should submit a request for funding by the 31st of March.
For sure. I can definitely do that. The Fcm Advocacy Fund. This is once again another standing offer. It typically comes in between $50 and $60 a year. It's a fairly small amount of money for the fund. I'm not sure the exact details on exactly what all we get out of that, but I can look into that in more detail if council wishes and send us more information on that later.
Councillor Carver, you had a comment? You're on mute, Councillor.
I thought I just clicked it. Is that obligatory or is it discretionary?
My understanding is discretionary.
Yeah, I think it is a discretionary request that goes to all FCM members, but it's discretionary to contribute to, if I recall. So it's based on our being a very small community that our charge is so small.
Do they actually send us a request for that amount of money, or for some amount of money every year? Or?
We typically do get a notice at some point through the year, hence why the 2020-21 actual was 52. It's like Dylan mentioned, it's based on like the size of municipality. They'll send you a letter requesting that the town contribute X amount of money, X amount of dollars toward the fund. So there is something that comes in later on in the year. It's just not typically received by the time we're doing the budget deliberations.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor has his hand up, and then Councillor Burdick.
Sorry, if I was to make a decision tonight based on the fact that we don't have anything that tells us what that is for, I would say we give them 0. That's just my thoughts.
And I certainly don't disagree with that. I was just looking back, and I think the Advocacy Fund was instituted in preparation for a prior election, and FCM essentially saying that it was important to raise the priority to municipal issues. So we'll probably, because there is an election issue, or because there is a likely election, we probably will receive a similar request this year. But that's, I was just looking back to see where it came from, and I think it began as a whenever there's going to be an election, the FCM feels the need to make more of a point of municipal issues. Again, we don't have a request at this time.
Councillor Carver?
I think Councillor Burdick was next, and then
I'm sorry, she was. Right there, look.
Thank you both. Yeah, I just for viewers, I think it should be pointed out that that's Federation of Canadian Municipalities, if people are wondering what FCM is.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings one way or the other on this particular line.
Okay. What about, what can we, Councillor Carver, go ahead.
Yes, so just despite what the deputy mayor said, we've already accepted that the Bayview yearbook was approved without their having submitted a request. So it's just an example of the inconsistency, in my view. And I was also going to say that I think that it's in the spirit of municipal collaboration to put in that $60 to FCM Advocacy Fund.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, is your hand up, sir? Or it is? Okay.
What I wanted to say is that my reason for saying that, I guess, 0 for FCM is that if we'll be denying community groups or folks that are close by money, which we will end up doing because of the amount of money we are allocating, then I would feel kind of guilty giving an organization that I would assume they will be slightly more flush with money than the community organizations we have now. So
that depends on who you ask. Deputy
I know,
Mayor,
but
whether or not they're flush with money.
everybody says they don't have money, but yeah, if we're denying community organizations, I would say, well, let's start with those ones that are a bit far.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Let's go. There's I'm sorry, Mr. Wenzel, the grad parade is next on the list.
So before we move on, do we make a decision on this? I know we had discussions on both sides of the fence, but I wasn't sure how we were going to proceed at the present time for the FCM Advocacy Fund.
Show of hands for the FCM to get the $60. 1, 2, 3, 4. FCM gets the $60.
Okay.
Let's go to the grad parade.
And we'll just note it's only if asked. So like,
If asked,
technically,
absolutely.
we don't
Yeah.
necessarily expect we will be asked. We won't just send off a check into the void.
Right.
Yeah.
So
We
the
might
grad
be
parade,
in-
that was just for last year. So there's no current applications received. I'm not sure what the plans are for this year. So I would recommend leaving that at 0 for now. I mean, if something does come up later in the year, we could
Yeah.
definitely revisit that request. But for the time
Okay.
being, I'd recommend leaving that at 0.
All right. Health Services Foundation.
So that one there, it was the first grant included in the grant package that was distributed to council.
That's the group that wants to buy the bus. CAO and then Councillor Feeney.
So just, yeah, clarification, the Health Services Foundation is the charity that supports the Social Regional Hospital. We've had 2 prior requests from them over the past 2 years having to do with the mural that the town had done as part of our centennial and the original sort of sketch artwork for the mural, because our mural artist had suggested to this organization that they might ask the town to donate that as a fundraising option. We wrote back and said no, that the town preferred to display it, but to solicit a donation from the town via our grants to organizations process. So I think that they have submitted this application essentially because we urged them to do so. So I just wanted to put that context there.
Okay, Councillor Feeney and then Deputy Mayor.
So Mayor, in my opinion, the Health Services Foundation does wonderful work. I'm sure they, solicit significant funds for the community. And I think everyone in this meeting is probably supportive of the organization, but fundamentally they're a fundraising organization. And I do personally, I think this item has come up every year that I've been on council, and probably for many years before that. And council traditionally has been reticent to provide the organization with funding because they were an aggregator of funds versus our from our perspective, we wanted to fund an organization who was going to spend the money on something on a direct project. So normally I'd be probably reticent, as I have been in years past, about direct use of taxpayer fund to fund that organization. And traditionally, we also had the same conversation about VON, although I noticed that they did sneak in at the bottom of the list several years ago. And once they're on the list, they stay on the list for a long time. So I'd be more inclined to keep our direct cash support for the organization supported by taxpayers' dollars at a low number, knowing that we all can write a check individually if we so choose.
Okay. Are you
So
suggesting an amount?
I'd recommend, to the CAO's point, a donation of $250 with the acknowledgement that we had multiple pieces of correspondence from them last year.
Okay. Councillor Carver?
Yeah, I support that. And I would entertain this request specifically because it is for a clear project, which is to buy the bus for the veterans unit.
For the veterans unit.
Yes. So, and I think that the amount is suitable.
Okay. Anyone else? Show of hands, agree on the 250 for the Health Services Foundation. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, agreed. Let's go to the Heritage Boatyard Co-op.
Okay, so this group here also submitted an application as well. And they're looking for funding for ongoing operations, including the making and building of more wheelchair-friendly maintenance, insurance, and the construction of their various projects.
Okay. Comments or observations? Anyone? Councillor Wilson.
I think it's worth the $500 to keep those old guys off the street.
Maybe they can get some lights in their boatyard shop so they don't have to sit there in the dark in the summertime. Okay. Anything else on the Boatyard Co-op? Show of hands for 500.
Oh.
Okay, motions that's agreed to. Let's go to the Mahombe or Christian Martel. There's nothing submitted there. Mahombe Founders Society Home and Garden Tour.
So this once again is a standing item, no grant request formally received. Historically, we have contributed $500 to that event, or a version of that event in the case of last year. So once again, with this summer shaping up as an unknown, I'm not sure what council's wishes are for this request.
They had a video tour last year that was accessible through the museum.
I think one of the challenges for this type of an organization or an activity is to just keep something going year to year that will sustain through to when they can do normal activities again, so that they likely will make a some type of an offering this summer.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
I'm just going to suggest that in the absence of a specific request, that we make that 250.
As we did a couple of units back. Okay.
Yes.
Are we in agreement with the 250? One, our Deputy Mayor, you're agreeing, or did you want to comment?
I have a comment or a question. So one of, in trying to think about how we're going through this, we're saying our bottom line is 5,500. And the way they're listed, so they're listed in a way that if we're giving away money up there, then we will be forced to either not give or cut significantly some of the requests that are down here. And I was sort of wondering, how do we balance, I guess, need and importance, so to speak? in this particular scenario?
CAO?
Oh, well, I'm some way to address that in part, because otherwise it's just going to favor people based on the alphabetical name of their organization. We're going to get a lot of AAA pro kids, or AAA para hockey, or whatever. So we usually don't worry about whether the balance at the end does exceed, in the sense that, you can then talk about whether the budget line should be greater or whether there's anything to revisit. So yes, it does show the balance ticking away like that, but in prior years, we've often came in a bit below or a bit above and not attempted to come in right on that line. So just as a consideration, I would say look at them on their merits rather than worrying about that that declining balance line at the bottom.
Okay. Thank you. So, Home and Garden Tour, $250. We did that one. Or we're doing that one. In agreement with the $250 for the Home and Garden, Home Museum Home and Garden Tour. Okay. Let's go to the Mahombe Music Association.
So once again, this was an organization that did submit an application to the town for the grant in the amount of $2,500. The grant is for music productions at the bandstand during the summer months and paying for the musicians and other ongoing costs to keep that event happening. Once again, with COVID is the uncertainty. We're not sure how that's going to pan out this year, as it didn't happen last year due to COVID.
CAO?
Oh, I just wanted to add that on that note, kind of like the Pool Society, this organization, which has requested a lesser amount in the past, noted in their application that they felt that a higher cost would be required to deliver programming safely during COVID. But obviously, in using the bandstand, their intention is to do that activity in a safe way regardless. But I just wanted to note that they did seem to acknowledge that they anticipated increased costs as a one-time thing this year due to COVID in their application.
Councillor Burdick and then Councillor Feeney.
I think that that's a reasonable amount to request for a service of this sort. I'm thinking of the cost for a basic honorarium for artists alone. Even if it were broken down without any additional costs, $300 would be not a huge amount for artists visiting. It would be of great benefit for the town to have a really to have events that are comfortable, that are still COVID safe, and that are ongoing in the absence of other things that can happen. So it seems like a reasonable request to me.
Okay, Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I noted that how successful the photograph by Betty Meredith of the bandstand was at the fundraiser for the museum this weekend. And so we've spent, we've spent a lot of money on providing the bandstand and the infrastructure outside of it. And I think we're now at a point where everybody wants to enjoy it. So this is a large allocation of funding, but I think Council Burdick, I liked how she described it as really it's a grant for artists to take advantage of this community asset. There's nothing sadder than watching an empty bandstand on a Sunday afternoon. So I do think I'm not sure how sustainable $2,500 is over the long term. Maybe we would hope for a more modest price, but I think for this year, based on the grand opening and all the other things, I can get my head around that number and support that $2,500 request.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All in favor of the $2,500 for the bandstand grant? Councillor Burdick, okay, that's good. We're good with that one. Is that Mahombe? What's the MBTC?
That is the tennis club.
Oh.
So no grant requests were received this fiscal year for that.
Really? Somebody has to phone in that. She'll be on it tomorrow.
And not to undermine any grant requests that they might have, but I did want to note that council recently approved a little bit over $4,000 for improvement of the parking lot for the tennis club, which could be thought of as a one-time project in support of the club.
Yeah. MODL Pro Kids.
This is once again, no application received, just funding the program to allow residents to participate in it. Historically, it's been funded at $500 a year.
Counselor Now, and then Counselor Feeney.
Yeah, do we know if we have any kids participating in that? I know that we were discussing with MODL about getting our people approved, and I don't remember hearing back about anybody saying whether they had done so or not.
So it's a good question, Counselor Now. So we are still in a bit of a limbo with regards to our official role in the program. So basically last year, MODL still unofficially accepted participants from the town of Mahombe as they've done in prior years. And we sent them a check that was essentially unsolicited and said, you know, thank you. We'd love it if you put this towards the kids from Mahombe. But we actually still at that time didn't actually have a process where they put that into the reserve and track it and report back to us for administering the program as we've requested that they do. So I don't know if, and I'll check with Maureen, if we got some informal numbers around, because they do know who was residing in Mahombe, who accessed the program, but we're not formally tracking it because last year we were not formally participating. And I know there's still some I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed on whether we will be formally participating when they go out and call for participants this year. But I certainly hope we will have worked that out. I know Maureen continues to correspond with MODL staff in that regard. And I mean, I think the general agreement is there. It's just a question of how it would be administered by their staff.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Feeney, then Counselor Carter, and then Deputy Mayor.
I'm fine, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Carter?
Yeah, I just find this so confusing. We're giving them money and we don't have an official arrangement, and they haven't answered our requests for well over a year. I just find it kind of baffling. And I mean, I support the idea of giving the $500, but I do wish that they would make a formal arrangement with us so that we could promote it.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I support the 500. I think from my perspective, it's a small amount compared to the amount of support they probably provide kids who come from Mahombe that access the program. We might be shocked when we ask for that formal arrangement, and then we might need to up the number that we give them on a regular basis. So I know probably it's maybe just the administrative side of things that things are delaying. So I'd be supportive of this. Hopefully somewhere down the road we'll get to a place where it's a formal arrangement, and maybe we might be at a place where we're saying we're ready to expand our support of the program as a whole.
Thank you. CAO?
Yeah, I just wanted to report as we've been talking, Maureen reminded me that we actually did have information that MODL received and processed in last fiscal year, 9 applications from 7 children residing in Mahombe for a total of $2,435. Now that is submitted by, supported by other funding sources to the Pro Kids program, but it does give a sense that, you know, even the $500 that's budgeted here wouldn't go all that far towards satisfying the demand from Mahombe. Yeah.
Okay. Good news. Any other comments? Okay, who agrees with 500 for the Pro Kids? That's agreed to, that's approved. Yes, let's go now. Lunenburg County quarter-page magazine ad, no request for this year.
So the next one would be the Para Hockey Cup Championships, which is a championship tournament at the LCLC. And we did receive the application for that request.
Is this program confirmed at this point, or is it one of these things that may vaporize?
My understanding was confirmed with the date from December 4th to 12th. I mean, I believe it's confirmed as of now. However, If, COVID spikes again or
Okay.
some sort of complications arise, then likely won't happen. But as of now, the latest update that I received was that it was still happening.
Okay, Councillor Carver and then Councillor Feeney.
Yes, I would support $500 for that project. I think it was wildly popular, the last event that they held, and it had some very positive spin-off events where able-bodied kids were doing sledge hockey too. So it was a very interesting and very popular event. But 500 rather than the 750.
We should have a para hockey game of decrepit old councillors from, maybe Bridgewater and Lunenburg or something. Okay, Councillor Feeney.
No, I think Councillor Carver covered it well, Mayor.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment? Para hockey championships, $500. Agreed? Okay. Let's go to Mr. Wenzel. We've got the Social Tourism Cooperative.
This here is a standing grant every year, basically just funding various tourism-centered initiatives, advertising around the local community.
And this actually represents a voluntary membership purchase by the town in the cooperative. So most of the municipalities in the county purchase memberships as a way of supporting the organization and have done for a number of years. So that's what that would be equivalent to one membership.
Was there not an organization prior to this one that we used to contribute to?
The Social Tourism Association was the predecessor to this organization. I don't know about the town's relationship with it. Most likely we had some financial relationship, but that would be before my time.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
Yes, this item goes back to one of my original questions about what are the categories. So if this is to purchase a membership, would it not go in the subsidy category?
Yeah, it also could arguably be cited as economic development initiatives as a line item. We didn't have a line item for economic development initiatives when this was first requested, which was, I guess it was probably 2017 when that organization started. But yeah, I mean, I do see the logic in potentially moving it from here.
Thank you. And if 350 is the amount, then I support that amount.
If we moved it to as a line item in economic development, would we even have to deal with it here, CAO?
And we wouldn't have to deal with it here, and we actually wouldn't have to change the budget because we have unspent funds in the line item for economic development for the year.
Okay. It may be more appropriate to do that. Councillor Burdick and then the Deputy Mayor.
I would support that suggestion. It seems to make a lot of sense, especially since we're trying to wiggle numbers around here.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
When we I guess purchase that membership, does that give us any say into how they run things?
We are a voting member in the AGM. It's something that council hasn't traditionally appointed a member to represent. When we do our council appointments, we definitely could do that. We're welcome to attend those. I mean, all members of council and staff are welcome to attend.
And the reason I'm asking about that is that so they, in many ways, are behind the lobster crawl. And I mean, it's a good initiative in some ways, but it ends up being an alcohol promotion, alcohol drinking promotion campaign, which doesn't line up very well with being a healthy community. So that's something. If there's over that opportunity,
I respectfully disagree.
then that's fine. that's fine. I would appreciate having the time to have a comment whenever that opportunity arises.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll
thank
when
you.
I do get the invitation, I'll send that around to council members, and I think any or all of you could join.
Okay. So we're in agreement to shift the South Shore Tourism Cooperative to our economic development project? Good, thank you. Let's go to the VLN Lunenburg County.
This is the last request that we have for grants. This was a physical request that was received, and it's for improving the transportation around Lunenburg County.
Councillor Carver.
I didn't understand it as being for improving the transportation. Well, just transportation. The VON is doing a phenomenal amount of work in the town of Mahombe, in helping with groceries and helping with drives to medical appointments. That's the transportation part. With their volunteers as well as their paid staff, and delivering food from the food bank. I mean, they're really doing a lot of work. So I would really like to see a generous donation to the VON, because I think they are providing clear direct services within the town that wouldn't otherwise be happening.
Okay.
So they've asked for 2,500?
2,000.
2,000, right. So I'd say I'd support 2,000.
Okay. Anyone else wish to comment? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, so I think if we're going to do that, it might be prudent to kind of break that line item into two items, and to separate kind of a standard VON donation at more traditional levels. I think we've been at $700 or $800, $750 to $800 for 3 or 4 years, and then maybe have a separate line item for a very specific donation from the town to speak to Councillor Carver's COVID-related activity. Unless we think we are going to start taking this budget line item up to a higher, more sustained number, because I think we've traditionally been in the $55,000 to $6,000 range. If we take this line item up to 10,000, well, fair enough. And there are some other community groups that will want to support throughout the year that haven't yet made their applications. I know we have deadlines, but I know I think what happens is that when we default back to what we funded the year before as the standard, and it doesn't recognize kind of the ups and downs of our allocation of the funding based on need and or trying to spread the money around to have the biggest impact. Does that make sense, Councillor Carver, that we'd break that VON donation into 2 pieces, like a one that would map specifically for one purpose, which would be the traditional work of the VON, and the second component of the $2,000 to be specific to their budget request?
So that one would be almost a standing contribution,
which would kind of mirror up with what we've traditionally had in line 20.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would augment line 20 with a separate line item to say, based on this particular calendar year and all the challenges of COVID, we'll augment that budget by a line item.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thank you, Councillor Feeney.
Does that sound reasonable to everybody? What do you think, Mayor?
If the VON are citing the impact of COVID as a major drain on their resources, which would certainly seem to substantiate the increase from 800 to 2,000, I think we could sustain the 800 or 900 or 1,000 as our contribution, and then $1,000 in recognition of the COVID impacts on their organization and their duty roster. Councillor Now.
Yeah, are they specifying COVID as a reason for this in their application? I don't remember seeing that, but I know as far as the food bank goes and for them picking up groceries, that type of thing, that happens year round. regardless of whether COVID's on or not? Because they service the food bank, taking clients to the food bank and home again throughout the year. Now they're picking up the
Okay.
groceries and taking them to them, but so their role has changed some.
Councillor Burdick has your hand up.
Thank you. I do have a question. I do agree that there's this sort of an exceptional time and they've been doing a lot of increased work due to COVID. And I think they mention it. But it does raise the question with them if this is a sort of a standing, understood yearly application, or if they apply each year. Because if you're dividing it in that way with that understanding, I hope they have that understanding too, sort of similar to some of the other lines that we've provided funding for.
I would think we could certainly explain to them in the letter that would accompany the notice of the grant that whatever amount is given for COVID or was given as the town's contribution, that it would be for their use when they apply next year, that sort of thing. So they would not think it's going to become an automatic allocation.
Thank you.
Councillor Carver, what do you think?
They do specify in their application that their activities have been impacted by COVID, so that the driving issues, and they're doing more of that driving and transportation because of COVID. I quite like the idea of dividing it with Councillor Feeney's original suggestion. I'm not quite sure what the formula would be. I think the mayor, you said go
Just
back
cut
to
it
the
in
standard 800 and cut it in half.
I said 800 or 1,000. 1,000 would be the town's contribution and 1,000 would be in recognition of the problems that they've had with COVID. And I'm sure they've had a lot.
Yeah. Yes, including loss of volunteers, so that the yeah, certainly.
Okay. Any other comments? Do we agree? Two contributions, $1,000 each? Okay, good, thank you. Okay, Mr. Wenzel. Let's move to the next screen. What's the total now of our...
So basically right now we're sitting at $310 over what we had originally had budgeted here.
I think you might be
Okay.
1,300 over though. Is the formula including the new line?
I'm just checking that now. Technical difficulty, stand by.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, $1,000.
the least helpful thing of all when it pops up a help window.
So yeah, right now we're sitting at $310 over 6,500. So if I remove that, we have total grants provided of $6,810.
And when you prepared the budget, you were using what amount?
5,500, I believe.
Okay, so there is a 1,310 difference from the original budget amount. Which, I mean, it would, at this point in the budget, that would have very little change because the operating reserve transfer would go up by that much. And we've cited COVID-specific rationale for more than $1,300. So I think you could say that the impact on the operating reserve to doing a little extra grants this year was a COVID impact, very reasonable one.
I think we can live with that extra $1,300 in pain, Mayor.
Okay. We're good with that? All right, let's go with it. Thank you.
Just before we move on from that, I
yes,
just wanted
please.
to ask if we should put a little buffer on top of that amount to account for any potential grants coming in throughout the year, or if we should just leave it at the 6,810 firm.
And it's really a philosophical question because, you know, obviously grants that come in throughout the year that council decides to accept would simply lead to a lower year-end surplus or a year-end deficit covered from operating reserve. Whereas if we budget for the transfer and show it as a transfer from operating reserve now without, you know, anticipating additional revenue, it ends up in the same place. It may indicate to council members when we go back to this, when we get a request, what you had initially had in mind as a ceiling, and it might indicate to would-be applicants, although it's unlikely any would be that aware of what number we had set and where we were.
Okay. Okay, and I would suggest that if we get requests for grants during the year, council would defer them to the budgeting process for the following year, unless, of course, they were critical, in which case council would address them anyway. And that doesn't happen very often. Okay, so we'll go with that.
Sounds good.
For the grants, let's go to the subsidies. Total is current 41,750.
And typically this one, and Luke can just review them to note any change from prior year and why there's a change.
So basically, these are the sort of standing, almost a lot of them are set prescribed amounts, such as the library contribution, regional housing contribution, REMO. This year, the swimming pool, they are looking for more funding just to try to help offset with having no activity last year and unknown impacts of COVID this year. The last that I heard, I believe, Dylan, they're still looking at opening the pool as other municipalities in the area are. So that still looks like that is a go. They are still, as of now, looking at opening the pool. So there will be undoubtedly, you know, fewer, you know, classes, less revenue coming in. So that's why that increase has gone in this year by request of the Pool Society.
I think we can say for sure that the $5,000 increase over prior years is something that will happen if the pool is open.
Yeah.
And is not anticipated to be in the full amount. It's not like we don't still have to pay some costs. Last year, it still did cost to just continue to have the facility and defray things and keep everything in shape. But the additional 5,000 would be, you know, if the pool were to open.
Okay, so if the pool doesn't open, we'll go back to the 10,000 of. Okay, good.
For the museum, it was low last year just because they were closed a lot. So there were a lot, electricity, water bills, that kind of stuff were lower. So this year we had budgeted 1950. I'm not sure how that's going to play out with the current situation, but hopefully that'll be behind us quickly. So hopefully we'll be able to get.
There's more of a standard budget, whereas you know, it's not capped at that amount. We're obligated based on paying for their actual utility costs.
Right.
If they're lower or higher than that, like any other part of the budget, other grants will just be flexible to the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chamber of Commerce, that is just a number based on prior years' sort of experience expectations over the last number of years. There is an ongoing topic of conversation here, as we don't receive typically any actual specific requests from the Chamber. So we're hoping to look forward to, you know, having some open communication going forward to better identify how and where this $2,000 allocation would be going. And then the last two lines, the senior safety program, that's just a standing amount to contribute to that program, and same as the LCLC contribution.
Mm-hmm.
So Luke, we don't intend to cut a check for $2,000.
No.
We'll wait and see if grant requests were received, and at this point, it might not even be from the chamber. It might be a successor organization to the chamber, specifically focusing on one of those events or part of an event.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Tax exemptions. Oh, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Wilson. The screen says Councillor Kelly. And the deputy mayor as well.
My question was about tax exemptions. But I'd forgotten we have a screen for that.
Okay. Deputy mayor?
With the regional housing authority, I'm trying to remember. I thought you would say that they gave you some specific quotes for some that's coming up, or am I
Yeah, I think
supposed to
that's
be
that's a good catch, Deputy Mayor, because we amended it in the actual budget, and all this section does is breaks out the budget. It's not balancing, so it's not an issue with the budget, but Luke, you'll need to make sure that you've reflected it here. Yeah, good catch. It won't change anything, it's just a statement of, but we should have it accurate here to reflect what's in the actual budget.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so we'll move on to the tax exemptions quickly. These are just a couple properties that are tax exempt. We've got the Mahombe Center, the water utility property, the Founders Society Museum. Those are all just basically static ones year over year. And then down here for this one, these properties have to physically apply. Currently, this is the only property that has applied for this exemption based on the dual use of the residence. And basically just calculate based on the proposed tax rate, based on their assessment, and then the numbers just calculate off of that information.
Okay.
Hello.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the screen up over on my other computer. Councillor Kerver.
Thank you. I was surprised when I saw that there was only one property in that sort of type of arrangement of part residential and part commercial, that only one property had that exemption. And it made me wonder, is it well advertised? People know that it's an option.
I don't think it's probably something that the town itself has advertised in the past, at least not since I've started working. I guess that could be something that we could look at advertising to promote if that were the direction from council. I believe it would be something that they would have to apply through PVSC to get that dual rating for their properties. But then that would then filter through to the town on our assessment rolls, and then would pick up any additional properties here the following year.
Well, just an idea, and perhaps if they don't already know information to the chamber, if that hasn't already happened.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Are we finished with this item? Discussion is ended on the revised draft of 2021-2022 operating and capital budgets. Okay. Councillor Wilson? No? CAO?
So I think we said that we would talk about the time that we had in the meeting and the time remaining and what we would do. And I might just prompt that this would be an appropriate time to do that and maybe make a little context for that discussion, which is that barring any questions that people may have held over for closed session on the budget document, we are typically at a place at the end of a budget session where we would make a recommendation of the budget to council. So if there is budget related discussion to hold over to another meeting, you could hold over that motion as well. Or if there's closed session discussion that isn't explicitly budget related, we could continue with the plan to have a closed session at another date. But that would not necessarily require us to also bring forward the item discussion of the 2021-22 operating and capital budgets. So just a little note there, if we do go ahead with the plan to have like a spillage special meeting next week, it can be just the closed session discussion, not specific to the budget, and we could do a motion to recommend the budget to council tonight. Or if the budget discussion technically continues, we would say that's a budget session. And it might only be 5 minutes before we go into closed session, but we would start off with a quick, this is a budget session and an opportunity to conclude the process. I just wanted to put that out there.
Counselor Wilson.
I'd like to move that this group recommend this budget for approval to council.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. You've heard the motion. Counselor Feeney.
Quick question, Mayor. So this budget's based on one core assumption around the pumper that will be discussed in the closed session. And I'm wondering if we should maybe just vote on this motion, of which I'm absolutely willing to support now or later, until after we have that discussion in the closed session. I just wonder if the line, I guess cutting to the chase, speaking very plainly, it's not crystal clear to me that the budgeted line item for that capital item aligns with the RFP capital amount. Maybe it does, but I get a sense that it may not yet. And I'm wondering if we move this along right now, are we locking ourselves into the wrong number on that line item?
CAO and then Counselor Wilson.
Well, yeah, I don't want to stop Councillor Wilson from being able to comment on that. I just wanted to note that as far as the nature being locked in on an amount, obviously, when we have a budgeted amount for a project and then we come back to council and say we're going out to tender, the amount that we're going to get back on that tender is often not exactly reflective of the budgeted amount, and that for a variety of reasons. So we're not locked in that sense, but I also understand why council might want to have additional discussion around that number, just from understanding the possible impact on the capital reserve and other factors or borrowing levels.
Counselor Wilson.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I don't think that the pumper acquisition will have any material effect on the current budget in any case, because the tax rate, et cetera, will be adjusted to compensate for that next year.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Deputy Mayor, did you want to comment? No? Okay. Anyone else? You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. This group recommends this budget to council. Okay, it is 2 minutes to 9, council.
So with the budget process concluded, we do want to have a special, an opportunity for closed session, and presuming that we don't want to delve into it tonight, staff have suggested the possibility of a noontime closed session next week. But of course, I'm also available to continue going tonight. That is council's decision, but it is coming up on 9 o'clock. So we'll take your direction around your preference there.
So we have two choices. We can continue now, or we can, what is it, the 25th and 26th of next week? Or Councillor Carver, you had only one day you were available, I think.
2 days, but I just want to comment now. Are there any questions from the public? So that, and I would be prepared to go for, say, a half hour in camera to kind of get our ducks set up so that we could make the most efficient use of the 1 hour meeting that we'll have next week.
Okay.
I'm just putting that out.
Yeah.
After a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
5-minute break, 30-minute in camera.
And are there any questions?
And finish it next week. Agreed? Okay. Before we go in camera, do we still have people watching at home?
We do still have people watching at home, but there are no questions.
Thank you, Deputy CAO, the voice in the wilderness. Okay, I make it just coming up on 9 o'clock, 9:05. We will come back, and as soon as we come back, we'll go